Hi everyone. I mentioned on my last draft update that I'm more or less settled with the vast majority of my squad. I'd say, barring any exceptional issues with the team, I'm 80 to 90% settled with the players that I've got. But I did mention that there is one particular pain point that I have in my squad, and it's Bruno Fernandes. And I mentioned this, that I would consider Phil Foden. But the issue is that with Phil Foden, the X-Mins are a serious issue, even if a lot of his rivals in the team may not be there come game week 1, but the goal threat is definitely there with him. On the other hand, with Bruno Fernandes, especially with him now being the captain, the X-Mins is not an issue at all, but the goal threat just doesn't seem as potent as compared to Phil Foden if you do it on a, like, anecdotally speaking, just silo basis. I feel that of course there's benefits owning both, but Phil Foden is $1 million cheaper, and you can just spread those funds elsewhere. So I've basically just decided to escalate this matter, and I've decided to actually rely on an algorithm for the first time in making an FPL decision. It's something that I've not done before, and I had the good fortune of using some tools that have become available to me by Drafthound, and I'll put a link in the description below if you're also keen to explore that as well. So with their algorithm, they've been very transparent and clear with how it works, and they've assured me that their algorithm is based on market predictions and that they aggregate probabilities and historical metrics and results for certain events that happen from a wide range of sources and present them in one strong, easy to understand metric, i.e. expected points. And I've got no doubt that other tools also work in a similar fashion in this way. And the difference is that this year they've actually introduced expected minutes as a parameter as well to further increase the ability to predict player outcomes. So to cut a long story short, I'm going to use the algorithm to basically look at Phil Foden and Bruno Fernandes side by side as an FPL pick, not just for game week 1, but for the game weeks ahead. And yeah, without further ado, let's just get straight into it, because I'm just doing this for the first time and I've decided to do a straight on player comparison. So here we can see it. Foden on the left, Bruno Fernandes on the right. X-Mins, it's clear, 70 minutes for Foden, 89 for Fernandes in the opening game week. Percentage-wise, you've got Foden, who his ownership is creeping up slightly. It was at 10% when I previously checked. Now it's at 13%. And then Fernandes, at almost a quarter owned, is almost becoming like a template player. But it's the stats that are affiliated to these players for the game weeks ahead that really do interest me. And the difference for me is that if I go for Phil Foden, got $1 million in the bank, I can modify my formation. Whereas with Bruno Fernandes, I'm more or less set on a 4-4-2. And yeah, I could, with the extra $1 million for Foden, I could perhaps upgrade another defender if need be, even though the defense as I have it is fairly resolute. But let's just have a look at these expected points, because ultimately this algorithm's telling me what the expected point situation is. And the reality is a lot of seasoned FPL managers go for algorithms, and they essentially go for stats that are based on predictions. And this isn't something that I've done historically. I have considered expected points as a secondary metric in the last 2 seasons especially, but for a genuine 50-50 call, I've not really done it, and I'm going to do it for this choice potentially. So as we can see clearly, Fernandes is the higher owned player. We can see that in terms of expected points in the opening game week, 4.2 versus 5.0. So basically it's projecting that they'll both get at least a fantasy return. But then here's where it gets interesting. Look at the next 3 game weeks and look at the next 5 game weeks. That gap then increases 12.5%, 12.5 points for Foden, 14.9 for Bruno Fernandes, 20.8 over the next 5 game weeks for Foden, 23.9 for Bruno Fernandes. Now, you might be wondering, oh, that's nothing. That's just only like a couple of points here and there. But the reality is that if you lose out even by 1 point on your mini league rival every game week, that's enough to lose your mini league ultimately. And of course, it's easier to downsize from Bruno Fernandes to go to Foden than it is to upsize from Foden to Bruno Fernandes, because ultimately going from Foden to Fernandes, you might need to take a hit unless you roll a transfer and then get lucky. Whereas with Bruno Fernandes, he's a safer pick in terms of ownership, as we've seen. And straight away from the early metrics that I've just shown, he is expected and projected, according to the Drafthound algorithm, to get more points. And just on that alone, that looks very interesting right there. But let's drill further down, because my thinking was that it's going to be very close because of the goal threat that Foden offers, despite the limited X-Mins, the X-Mins that Fernandes offers, and the created chances, but not as a potent goal threat, as was the case in his first season and a half for Manchester United. So if we just drill down further, first game, scoring percentage, let's just go further up just to show Foden on the left, Fernandes on the right. This surprised me. Look at that. That first game week for against Burnley, Foden's algorithm projection is 16% scoring, and for Fernandes against Wolves, 31%. That's a huge disparity there. I wasn't expecting it to be that significant in terms of the difference. I thought it'd be a lot closer, and it was quite interesting because we saw that in terms of points, it seemed quite narrow. I think less than a point, but then the scoring probability says that Bruno Fernandes has a much higher chance to score in the first game week. And look at the assist percentage as well. It's almost double, 14 versus 27%. So far, from all the metrics that we've seen on this Foden against Bruno comparison, it's tick, 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 tick for Bruno Fernandes. I just can't believe how wide a gulf that is in terms of the metrics. So, like, if this was a football score right now, it's like 6-7-0 to Bruno Fernandes. And look at the goal involvement percentage, 49% for Bruno Fernandes, 28% for Phil Foden. It's almost as if, well, maybe that extra 1 million is probably worth it after all for Bruno Fernandes. In my mind, I'm just thinking of those times when Foden has shined for Man City. But the sad reality is, under the Pep Roulette system, despite his potency, he simply doesn't get enough minutes because he's managed across multiple competitions. Whereas with Bruno Fernandes, we know historically speaking, he hardly misses any games for any club that he's played at. So the X-Mins is there, and already with these early fixtures that we've saw, and also this initial fixture, Bruno Fernandes is looking like a very good prospect compared to Foden. Then we've got this yellow card metric, don't really care about that. It's the same. And here's another interesting metric I've just seen, expected points per game week. So we saw first game week, it was 4.2 versus 5.0. So yeah, first game week, it's almost neck and neck. The only difference is the X-Mins and the percentage is far more robust for Bruno Fernandes. So if you're a risk taker, you're willing to punt on Foden and go for that upside. But if you want to play it safe and you want to go template, as I've advocated for many of my picks, like it's basically telling me to go towards the Bruno Fernandes camp. So that's game week 1. So right now, there's not been a single metric that we've seen so far which has encouraged me to go for Foden. It's all Bruno Fernandes, one-way traffic. So game week 2, here we go. 4.0 for Foden, 4.7 for Fernandes. And just as a reminder, this algorithm that I'm showing, the metrics are from Drafthound, and I think there's different tiers of access that they have available. The link is in the description below. Feel free to see what access you can get, experiment accordingly. It's the first time I'm using their algorithm stats during preseason, hadn't used it before, and I just find it really fascinating in terms of these 50-50 calls, whereas before I would literally go on a coin toss, but I need to, think smarter in some ways. I look at how I did in the previous 2 seasons and how I did last season, and there were so many 50-50 calls that I made that just didn't work my way. So one of my lessons learned, especially from last season, is how am I going to play FPL smarter? And if it means being more influenced by expected stats when it comes to a 50-50 call, so be it. And right now, we can see that the answer is very clear cut in terms of who I should pick between Foden and Fernandes. So game week 3, 4.3, 5.2. Yeah, it's not even close right now. Game week 4. Here we go. Got an equalized metric. So I mentioned there hasn't been a metric which has been higher for Foden. The yellow card percentage was the same. Game week 4, it's 4.2 against 4.2. And if I just remember correctly, in game week 4, Manchester City, I believe, have got Fulham and Manchester United. If I remember correctly, I think they've got a trickier fixture potentially. They've got Arsenal. So look at that. Even with a harder fixture, they can just about equalise in terms of their points. So coming to game week 5, 4.1, 4.8. So it's all Bruno Fernandes. 4.4, 5.0. Again, Bruno Fernandes again. 4.1, 5.0. The algorithm is telling me clear cut, I must stick with Bruno Fernandes if I want to stick with my current approach. 3.6, 4 point, that's huge. Look at that, game week 8. I think that's the end of this particular player comparison metric. I need to have a look at what's happening in game week 8 there for Foden. So in game week 8, Manchester United have got Brentford at home, and Manchester City have got, if we have a quick look, they've got Arsenal away. So it's interesting that the Arsenal fixture for Manchester United wasn't as bad, but for Man City, it is trickier. And if I just remember correctly, for Manchester United, when it in game week 4 with Arsenal, was it at home? Let me just have a look. It's away as well. It's really interesting that despite the away fixture for Foden and for Bruno Fernandes against Arsenal in their respective different fixtures, it's still saying that like it's not as damaging for Bruno Fernandes. So yeah, the question I sincerely asked myself before making this video and during my last draft was that it's a 50-50 call between Bruno Fernandes and Phil Foden. And my gut instinct at that point, I know Phil Foden's got some minutes during the preseason match. There's a Premier League series or whatever it is in America. But having looked at this algorithm, that this has genuinely blown my mind that it's just so one-sided against Phil Foden. And of course, the percentage-wise, Phil Foden offers exceptional upside. He does. If you have that 5th spot place in your midfield, you're going 3-5-2, you're going 4-5-1, you can accommodate Phil Foden, why not go for it? But where I'm at with my current 4-4-2 formation, and I'll share the link to my updated draft, which I did on Friday in the description below as well, so you can see where I'm at. With the 4-4-2, I absolutely need to nail my defenders. I absolutely need to nail my midfielders as well. So I can't really have like a risky midfielder. I can't have a 1-point cameo from Phil Foden. And I've got Nakamba as my sub 1. I've got Bulldog as a sub 2. And I've got like Surridge as a sub 3. So really, it's simply not worth the risk. And just before I carry on, if you're able to like, share, and subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated. And I want to repeat this again. I'm not someone who deep dives into stats. I let the experts normally do that for me. But I had to look at what the algorithm is saying between Bruno Fernandes and Phil Foden, simply because I felt like it was a 50-50 call. And as I've shown in this video, on all the expected points, on all the other metrics from scoring, assisting, goal involvement, and also from game week 1 through to game week 8, it seems like a very clear-cut choice. If we just listen to the algorithm, if we're being robotic, and if we go template FC, it's saying go with Bruno Fernandes. And I honestly didn't expect it to be so clear-cut. I thought it'd be a lot more closer than this. Now, having said all this, Phil Foden could bang in a brace or a hat-trick in the Community Shield. His ownership will then skyrocket, and his upside might be significantly more different. I also want to make it clear that I know Gundogan's left, and there have been other changes. Mahrez has left as well. That by default you would assume, oh, and De Bruyne might not be fully fit apparently, that by default that's going to push Foden up the pecking order, and rightly so. But then they've got Alvarez as well. They've got Bernardo Silva, and they've got other players, Palmer and the others, who are also lurking about in the squad that Pep can leverage. My gut feeling is that if Phil Foden starts in the Community Shield and does well, his minutes will be managed. If Phil Foden starts in game week 1, his minutes will be managed. I just can't see overnight Pep making him like a regular starter. There aren't many regular outfield starters for Manchester City in the seasons under Pep. They're very few and far between. And I would like to pick him. He is he's $1 million cheaper compared to Bruno Fernandes. But the reality is that with this algorithm and with the definitions that I provided in terms of how Drafthound are calculating this algorithm as well, it's very clear that Bruno Fernandes is the superior pick. Now, of course, I'll revisit this algorithm and the percentages in the days and weeks ahead before game week 1, but it really has given me. I was going to say it's given me food. It hasn't just given me food for thought. It's made it very clear to me that just hold your horses, stick with Bruno Fernandes for now. And the next question I'm going to ask myself is, if I'm not going to go for Foden, is there another player that I could go? And I won't do this comparison now, but like, could I go for an Odegaard? Could I go for a Martinelli as a alternative for Bruno Fernandes? And maybe that's the route I might wish to explore. But having said all of that, Bruno Fernandes, he had the same amount of fancy returns as he did last season compared to the season before, and his price has gone significantly more cheaper. You could say that, okay, he was like, was it 10 million last year? I can't even remember now. But like, I wasn't expecting his price to dip to 8.5, but okay, maybe 9 million, 9.5, but they've just cut all the prices wholesale. So Bruno Fernandes does offer exceptional value. Now the question is, they've got Mason Mount in the team. They might get another striker, perhaps, whether it's Harry Kane or whoever it is. What will his role be? And that remains to be seen. But he's a captain. He's a captain of Manchester United. He can create chances. Oh yeah, he can be the assist, whatever. But he can also be on set pieces. And if need be, United can rely on him for goals as well. And part of me thinks that, you've got that Captain Marvel mentality as well, that you've got that desire to score more goals as well. And my gut feeling says that perhaps he might score more goals than he did last season, wherever he may play across the pitch ultimately in that midfield. But to cut a long story short, and to answer my own question, that choice between Bruno Fernandes and Phil Foden is very clear for me now. So I won't be updating my draft to get Phil Foden in, but there might be other alternatives to Foden, which I've mentioned, who I could consider. So there you have it. So once again, the algorithm was available and used from Drafthound, and I'll put a link in the description below as mentioned. Be sure to check it out and decide for yourself if it's viable for you. And yeah, there we go. So take care and all the best. Thank you, everyone. Bye.